Hi, everyone. Welcome. I want to say thank you so much for being here this evening. We are getting ready to kick off our webinar tonight. My name is Ryan Acker. I'm the operations manager with United Suicide Survivors International. And we have a very special set of guests here today who are going to be talking about the power of lived experience story campaigns. As many of you know, we are dedicated to uplifting the voices of people with lived experience to create change. And so tonight we have this opportunity to talk about what that looks like and how we can do story campaigns in our local communities. I'm excited to be joined by Jen Matoney, Nichols, and Terri Lavely. And we're going to talk with them a little bit more here in just a few moments. But for those of you who might be new to United Suicide Survivors International, I would love to share with you just a little bit about who we are and what we do, and then we will jump right in without further ado. So, for the next slide, I would love to just talk to you a little bit about our mission. United Suicide Survivors International is an independent global organization that serves as a home for people with lived experience. And that means people who have experienced suicide loss, people who have attempted suicide, and people who have struggled with suicide thoughts and feelings, as well as our family members and supporters and advocates to leverage our experience and expertise to create change. Our mission is to cultivate the lived experience of suicide into action through advocacy, education, and leadership, and collaboration. And ultimately, we envision a world where lived expertise is the fulcrum that creates change through suicide prevention, through mental health and addiction recovery care, and that one day we're able to see a world where organizations like ours are no longer needed. We do that through several different programs. As I mentioned, one of the key things that we are dedicated to doing is amplifying the voices of lived expertise so that we can make changes in policies and culture and systems. One of our programs, the Eye of the Survivor workshops and retreats, is dedicated to teaching people how to do that, how to share their story and tell their story safely and effectively, and through webinars such as these, where we amplify advocates and people who are using their experience to create change. We recently launched our new lived experience collective community home on circle.so, which is a place for people to share their stories, to connect with one another, and to share their events and to learn how to see opportunities to share resources and to build bridges across our community. We have lived experience convenings and we have our own online storytelling courses that also help people learn how to tell their story safely and effectively. One of the key things that we care about greatly is workplace suicide prevention. So, our National Workplace Suicide Prevention Committee creates many different tools throughout the industry. We have our HOPE certification program and our Construction Mental Health and Wellbeing Summit, which is coming up in February of 2026. There are lots of other things that we do, but the most important thing is that we work to empower people to turn their pain into purpose so that we can create change. With that, I want to welcome our very special guests tonight who are going to be leading us through some really incredible tools and powerful examples of how we can move forward in our local communities to really create change. And so I'm so excited to have our guests here today. What I'd love to do tonight is to start off with a couple of questions. Well, one question really for each of our guests, and then we have a PowerPoint that they'll be sharing. If you have questions for those of you who are joining us live, please feel free to enter them into the chat or the question button, and I'll be sure to facilitate those with our guest speakers so that we can make sure that those get captured. The first question that I love to start off with is what is your story? Why are you connected to what brought you to storytelling campaigns? And so I'd love to ask that question first to our special guest, Jen Matoney.
Thank you, Ryan. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say it feels like a full circle moment for me tonight because I used to work in programs and communications for United Survivors, and so it's really special to kind of be on the other side of this webinar tonight as a panelist. And I am still involved with the storytelling program with United Survivors. I am a suicide loss survivor. And I do a lot of different prevention and postvention work, including training. I do critical incident responses. I go to schools and workplaces when there have been suicides and other critical incidents. I lead support groups for suicide loss, and I am co-chair of my local coalition for suicide prevention here in Western Massachusetts. And most recently, I have been working on lived experienced storytelling campaigns, kind of mixing my media background with my suicide prevention and awareness work. And it's been great to be able to marry the passions. And I'll now pass it over to Nick, if that's okay, same for the same question.
Yeah, absolutely. And good evening, everyone. My name is Nichols. I work at the Vermont Department of Health, and I coordinate a suicide prevention grant that we have for the for Disease Control and Prevention. And so I come to this discussion around storytelling from a broad public health perspective. As part of our federal grant, we've been using data and listening to people who've been affected by suicide to understand the experiences and what's happening for people in the time before their death. And what we've been finding is that only about a third of the people who die by suicide in Vermont have any kind of recorded connection with formal mental health treatment system before they died. And so what that means basically is about 2/3 of the Vermonters who are dying by suicide did not ask for help or get connected to mental health treatment in the year before their death. And so because of that, we know even if Vermont developed the perfect mental health treatment system, we would still be missing the majority of people who are dying by suicide. And a big reason that we believe this is happening is because in Vermont, and I think nationally, there's a culture where a lot of people don't feel comfortable asking for help if they're struggling. Or they may feel that there's no hope that things will get better if they do ask for help, or they may be experiencing barriers to get that help. We also believe that, here in Vermont and nationally, there is a culture where a lot of Vermonters are afraid or hesitant to reach out to someone. If they're worried about them, ask them if they're okay, ask them if they're thinking about hurting or killing themselves. And so because of that, a lot of people who are struggling are not getting access to help. And so here in Vermont, with that in mind, we decided that we wanted to develop a campaign and a website that helped to change this culture to some degree. And we felt like the best way to do that would be to design a campaign really focused on and featuring real Vermonters talking about the issue of suicide, whether they themselves had struggled or if they had lost someone to suicide. And we really wanted to show the rest of Vermont that it's okay to talk about this issue openly, and that there are many Vermonters out there, many of whom are like the people that we know or ourselves that have been affected by suicide in some way. And so through the support of many partners, we were able to develop the Facing Suicide Vermont campaign, which features the faces and stories of Vermonters talking about how they've been affected by suicide. We named it Facing Suicide because we both wanted to ask Vermont as a state to help us face this issue. And we wanted to do this by featuring the faces and stories of Vermonters talking about suicide. So as part of this campaign, we needed to collect and share stories of Vermonters. So we initiated the Real Stories Project to collect and share stories and use those stories as part of our campaign and our website and our live events. And you're going to be hearing about some examples of our Facing Suicide Vermont campaign and the Real Stories Project tonight. And, it's our hope that for Vermonters that are struggling with suicidal despair, we're hoping that, when they hear these stories, it'll help them feel more comfortable to ask for help. And then that hopefully they'll feel some hope that things can get better. And we're also hoping for anyone who may be worried about someone in their life, that hearing these stories will help folks feel more comfortable reaching out, talking about the issue of suicide, being brave, and asking people, hey, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Are you thinking of killing yourself? And can I help you find support? So that's the perspective that I'm bringing here tonight. And I'm really excited to talk with you about the Facing Suicide VT project. And with that, I will turn things over to Terri.
Thank you, Nick. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am Terri Lavely. I actually live in what we call the Northeast Kingdom, or we affectionately say the Kingdom of Vermont, which is the ruralest part of Vermont. Professionally, I have worked in community mental health. I'm in my 22nd year, so I have the pleasure of providing mental health services to our communities for paid employment. And what brought me to share my story in the Facing Suicide Vermont campaign and the real stories was I'm a person of lived experience. Suicide has impacted my life for 3 decades as an attempt survivor, attempting to take my own life when I was 15 years old. And coming up on the 10-year date, 10 years ago, this coming January, I lost my 18-year-old nephew to suicide. You're going to hear more about my story and see my video in a few minutes, so I won't do a deep dive in that. I'm really, really passionate about connecting people to resources and supports when they're in mental health crisis and what that looks like. And that's why I engaged in this campaign, but I'm not going to take up much more time because you're going to hear a little bit more about me later. So I will pass it back to Jen or Ryan. I'm not sure.
Thanks,
Jen?
Terri. I think it's me. Thank you. So this is our agenda, our little journey that we're on tonight. I'm going to share a little bit more about my story briefly and then show you a couple lived experience story campaigns that I've been working on. Then we're going to see Terry's video from the Facing Suicide Vermont campaign. She'll talk about her participation in the campaign some more, and we'll get some practical information from Nick. And throughout the presentation, we'll be talking about caveats, considerations, and benefits. And then, of course, at the end, we'll share some resources. So my story started back, this is almost 20 years ago when I was a TV news reporter and I was living in South Dakota. You have to be willing to go anywhere to get that first on-air job. And so I worked in news and also later in TV production. And I enjoyed that work very much. So around this time, I lost my mom to suicide. And my mom was a wonderful mom and also like a best friend, someone that I would talk to a lot. And right after we lost her, I remember this is like the day we lost her. I remember my brother saying to me, "Mom taught us everything we needed to know to go through life." And that really just helped to give me a little bit of hope and to make me feel better in what was, the most life-shattering experience that I had ever had. And so my brother was right. And I did go on to get married and have a child. And it's unfortunate that my mom didn't get to meet them, but I do feel that she's always with me and guiding me. And I have her wonderful example that she set as a mom for me. And so, again, I feel like she's with me. And she is the reason that I kind of changed my career from media for a while, and I really got into the suicide prevention aspect. I did a lot of volunteering, and I began sharing my story mostly through AFSP. In the beginning, I talked at walks. AFSP, for anyone who doesn't know, is the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And I shared my story at walks, and I ended up going to DC with them a couple of times to share my story and advocate for legislative changes. And it was a really empowering experience. And also becoming part of the survivor community has been a huge, huge part of my healing journey. And through my work at United Survivors, I also really enjoyed diving deep into storytelling around suicide. And I want to acknowledge Dr. Sally Spencer Thomas, who is a pioneer in this area, which I'm sure you know. And if you haven't seen her TED Talk, Stopping Suicide with Story. I highly recommend that. Sally is a co-founder of United Survivors, and so I just want to acknowledge how much she and others at United Survivors have inspired me and helped me along with this journey focused on storytelling. So lately, I have had the pleasure of producing 2 storytelling lived experience campaigns. And the first one was called Shattering the Myths about suicide. And it is told through suicide loss survivors, suicide attempt survivors, people who have survived suicidal despair, the whole gamut of experiences, really. And through their stories, I was able to illustrate 7 different myths about suicide and kind of shatter these myths. And I won't dive too deep into them. I encourage you to check out the videos in your free time. We will have one a little later related to number 5 here, which you see commit suicide. And that's really not best practice language, and we're going to talk about that. So in the video, I kind of present it as a myth that people commit suicide. And we'll be talking more about that. So really, I just wanted to dispel the myths, provide some psychoeducation, and really elevate the voices of people who have survived these experiences in order to inform the field about what is needed and to empower them. You know, storytelling is a huge part, I think, of healing for many loss survivors, and it can be healing for both the storytellers and the audience who is listening to the story. We know that storytelling truly saves lives. You know, an example of that is through the Papageno effect, if you've heard of that before. And we also know that the opposite is true. When stories are not told safely and responsibly, they can have a harmful impact, and it really truly can actually be a matter of life and death. So we want to be really delicate and careful with the way that we do lived experience story campaigns. So, and I want to invite Nick and Terri to jump in here whenever they would like to about the Facing Suicide Vermont campaign. We have probably, I think, 30 stories on there. And again, it's people with the whole gamut of experiences involving suicide. Julian is someone we have sharing their story as a young person in college and going through a lot and talking about, you know, how they were able to recover and find help and hope. And we also heard from Marcus, who is up in the top left-hand corner here, who is a veteran, and he talked about being a loss survivor and an attempt survivor, and he's just incredible. He has Parkinson's, and he's in his 70s and still doing so much to try to help other people. He also opened up about safe storage of firearms and other items in his house during times of high risk. And I was just amazed that he just began talking about that himself, you know, without me really even asking him much about that. And I was just so grateful that he was willing to talk about that, and grateful to really all of the campaign participants to share so authentically and courageously. We have a video about advocacy and using your stories to help make legislative change. We heard from Richard, who lost multiple family members and coworkers to suicide, and himself is an attempt survivor. His story is just absolutely amazing. And some other examples, we actually, so we have written stories as part of the campaign, and then also video stories and audio stories. And so Dale submitted a written story, and Dale is an artist, and he talked about how there was someone who would come into his store where he sold his artwork. He was a painter and a photographer, excuse me. And he ended up getting a note from this person who said, "Your art helped save my life. I have been suicidal, and the only hope that I have found is through your art because I love your art and it has kept me going." And so that was just a very cool story about how sometimes the things that help aren't always things that we might expect. We also have, as part of the campaign, sort of montages of a lot of the different campaign participants sharing, for example, creative outlets for healing, and we have one about tips for loss survivors, and then just other videos that focus on different aspects. So it's mostly lived experience stories, but it's a few other few varied content, I guess is what I want to say. And I just want to invite Terri and Nick if they wanted to add anything that I may have left out thus far about the Facing Suicide Vermont campaign.
I think just, one thing I would add is the wonderful thing about including all these stories is we not only have their stories, but we have connections to all these people. And so in many cases, they become members of our advisory group and they come to events. And I feel like it continues to create a larger and larger network of people who are all connected around telling their stories. And it's been a very generative and very positive experience, I think, for all of Vermont to have these people step forward and share the stories in the way that they have.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And I wanted to mention, there were some of the storytellers were experienced. They were like pros at sharing their story and they had done it a bunch of times, and others were new, and it was the first time they actually ever shared their story publicly. And Sunny has an audio story, and it was the first time she shared her story, and it was just amazing. Um, and Terri, did you want to add anything? I just want to make space for you.
Thank you, Jen. I think you did a great job of summing it up. And I think with all of these stories, when you're struggling either with an attempt or a loss, or you are supporting somebody that might be thinking about suicide, you can click on, like, are you a reader? Are you a visual person? Are you an audio person? And so this really breaks down some barriers of communication and how people receive information. And I think it's really great that the Facing Suicide Vermont website recognized the different ways people receive information and how they're ready to receive it. Because sometimes you might just be, if you're a construction worker, you might be sitting in your truck at lunch and struggling. So you might just click on a quick audio thing and listen to it, or a video. Or if I'm a big reader, so I'm more likely to watch to read a story than I am to watch a video. So I love the different ways that stories are shared to meet all of the needs of anyone that might be interested in hearing or learning more.
Thank you. So, as we were sort of winding down the campaign, and we had posted about, like I said, about 30 stories, we ended up having a celebratory event and invited all of the storytellers and the general public. We had 65 registrants, and it was an event we called Facing Suicide Together Through Stories of Hope and Healing. So we had 4 panelists who were part of the campaign, and also a keynote speaker, Sarah Gare, who's a United Survivors former board member. And it was just a great way to get everyone together in person, to make connections. And I thought we got a lot of positive feedback, a lot of interest in it. We ended up presenting a similar session at the Vermont Suicide Prevention Symposium a month or so after this event that we had back in August. And I think Ryan had asked us why a campaign rather than just like having one person share a story, say on social media. And I really think that there's power in numbers and bringing people together. And again, helping people to really not feel alone, and and experience how many of us are out there who have been affected and creating that community. I know the community has been so important for me. I don't know if anyone else wanted to add anything about that before I move on.
Yeah, I would just add, in terms of creating that community, you may mention this before, Jen, but I was just really struck by we had both folks who were very experienced in storytelling, had been doing this previously, either through AFSP or through the National Alliance for Mental Illness, in their own voice. But we also had people who had never shared their story. And this was the first time they had considered doing it. And I felt like, um, Jen and the rest of the team, we all worked really hard to create a feeling of safety and trust, and creating different environments for people to share their stories. And we got some really nice feedback that people said, this is the first time I've ever talked about my own struggles, and it was incredibly meaningful for me. So it was a really great opportunity, I think, to both pull together people who have been doing this for a long time, but also bringing in folks who were just ready to first be a part of this community and share their story publicly, and then also say, I'm ready for what's next. Like, tell me how else I can be a part of the work. So all of that was really special, and it wasn't something we necessarily had planned, but was a really nice component of the ongoing nature of the project.
Jen, I think what Nick said is so powerful, and Catherine in the chat shared that she was part of this particular event, and that community building piece was so critical and so important. And I think that's one of the things that we really want to include, because that is also a way that we help people feel safe and welcome and included and supported. One of the things in our conversation about this webinar today that we had talked about is one of the other reasons, in addition to that community building aspect, is having those multiple speakers that allow people to relate to people differently. So if people are coming from different backgrounds or different cultures, that there is a way to do that. I'm not sure if that's covered more in your later on in the presentation, but if not, I think we would love to hear more about that particular piece, how those multiple voices can really help reach diverse communities in our communities.
Yeah. Oh, Nick, did you want to take that? I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, I think it is incredibly important, and I touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but I think what we were really striving for is that, for different Vermonters, kind of regardless of their background or who they are, they can see someone in the campaign that they relate to, and say, oh, that person, it sounds like they kind of have had a similar experience, or they may know what I've been through. And so having a diverse set of voices is incredibly helpful. I would also add, we really wanted to make a space where we change the stigma for both attempt survivors and loss survivors. We have heard a number of times that, when you lose someone to suicide, it can be an incredibly isolating experience. And the people who you were friends with or worked with suddenly don't know how to be around you in the same way. And it becomes very hard to connect with folks or find support. And we wanted to make sure that we were sharing voices and normalized both people talking about their own personal struggles, but also saying it's okay to talk about losing someone and what that experience was like. And so we're kind of hoping that by having both of those types of voices, for anyone who's been affected by suicide in any way, it's going to make it easier for them to find support and to talk about it openly. So.
Thank you. And I'll just add that we had people from different industries, particularly some high risk industries. We had a story from someone from the first responder community. We had people who have farming in their family and in their backgrounds. Um, and, we had people who identify as LGBTQ plus. We can always, I think, do a better job of trying to include diverse voices, and that's something that we're always working towards. It was something we tried to be intentional about. I'm sure that there, still are some voices we may have missed. And that's a good question to ask when you're doing these kind of projects and campaigns, who is being excluded from this? Who are we unintentionally leaving out, and how can we try and bring them into the campaign? And we did make a lot of efforts to make this campaign as diverse as possible and bring all kinds of viewpoints and perspectives and backgrounds. So, ultimately you do the best you can, but it's definitely something to be really, really intentional about. And I wasn't sure, Terry, if you had anything to add. No. Okay.
No, I
Thank-
think you guys did great.
Awesome. All right, so I'll just share a few of the prompts that I used when I was interviewing people. I did a lot of kind of pre-work with our storytellers to make sure that they were in a safe place in their journey, to make sure that they, really knew what they were getting into and that they had thought it through, that they had a self-care plan afterwards, for example. And so I would ask them a series of questions. I had prepared questions, but then I would, of course, ask them questions in the moment too, based on what they said, to really try and collect their stories from them, and to intentionally focus the stories on hope and recovery and help seeking and healing, and post-traumatic growth, turning pain into purpose. And so I would ask a lot of these questions here. I won't read them all, but this was my attempt to really try and get at the hope and the healing aspects, and to also have people share, what would have been helpful to you or to the person that you lost, in the case of a loss or losses, so that they can help, we can help inform the field of suicide prevention about what should be done differently. I mean, there's a real opportunity for that in these campaigns. And then I also wanted to make sure that the individual storytellers were really focused on their goal as storytellers, like by asking them this question, what do you really want the audience to take away or to understand? And I just think that that is a very direct way to get them to think about, like, wow, okay, what do I really want to, what am I trying to get across here? So there's all different kinds of examples of prompts, and this is just a handful. All right, and we are now going to watch Terri's story, and then hear more from Terri about her experience, and hopefully the tech thing is going to work. Let's see. Okay.
When I feel I'm struggling with my mental health, some things that I like to do is go kayaking, but also just taking my dogs for a walk. I really enjoy vacuuming. It's self-soothing to me. My name's Terri Lavely, and I lost my 18-year-old nephew 8.5 years ago to suicide. I'm also an attempt survivor. I have the privilege of actually working in mental health, and I volunteer for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. For my own attempt when I was 15, the loss of my nephew really made me braver talking about my own attempt. It had been buried for 3 decades. We didn't talk about it, we didn't acknowledge it in our family. And it really started helping me heal by being able to talk about my own experience when I was a teenager and my own attempt in surviving that, and how it felt to not talk about it and be so stigmatized for so many decades. So my nephew's death has actually helped me process my own attempt and has helped me heal in the process of grief of losing him. My therapist has helped me the most on my healing journey, really helped me understand that I hadn't grieved because I was too busy taking care of everyone else. And my friends and family that allow me to talk about my nephew, and not the way he died, but who he was as a person. suicide doesn't define who he was as a person. He was, over 6 feet tall, a beanpole, very quiet, but very sarcastic at the same time, gave the best hugs, and was just a joy to be around as a human being. My nephew has taught me that I need to allow myself to feel the feels. I'm very much a doer and a caretaker. And it took me a long time to even start my grieving process of losing my nephew, and recognizing that I needed to work through my own attempt because it was buried for so long. That I was telling them without saying words. And I wish somebody would have asked me if I was struggling. I wish there would have been more safe adults in my world that felt comfortable seeing and recognizing and acknowledging that I was struggling. And knowing those warning signs, they were there and nobody asked me. Sometimes when you experience trauma when you're younger, adverse childhood experiences especially, it impacts your mental health as an adult. And we need to recognize that there is a strong correlation from childhood trauma to struggling with your mental health as an adult. So really understanding where kids are coming from. There's a high rate of attempts for youth population because of the way their brain develops, and especially if they have experienced trauma as a youth. I have a very high ACE score, and it did contribute to my attempt to take my own life when I was 15. When I attempted to take my own life, when I was in progress, I got scared. And after I had made the decision, I instantly regretted it. And that's why I'm still here today, because I got scared enough to reach out for help and got to the hospital in time. And afterwards, after I was discharged from the hospital, people need to know that you're not instantly better. You might not still want to live, right? After an attempt. And it's really getting the supports and services that you need to feel better. That people that attempt they don't just the next day feel better if they survive. They still need help and love and caring and connection. It's okay if your neighbor comes over with cookies and has a cup of coffee. That's exactly what you need, is to know that people aren't going to judge you, and they're going to be there for you, even though you're struggling with your mental health. Somebody has a cold, you wouldn't hesitate to bring chicken noodle soup to them. Why wouldn't you stop by with a plate of cookies if they're not feeling mentally well? Everybody loves cookies or pizza. Normalizing the conversation would help prevent it and making it okay to talk about your mental health, but also creating resources and eliminating barriers to supports and services. 988 has been great in the state of Vermont, but we need more services like walk-in mental health clinics, peer support, and other things so people can get connected to the resources they need. And that's not always traditional therapy or medication. It's okay to struggle with your mental health. We all have mental health and we need to take care of it. And also, you shouldn't be worried about asking someone else if they're struggling with their mental health or having thoughts of suicide. Talking about suicide doesn't make other people suicidal. It opens the door of conversation and actually creates connection and hope for someone that might be struggling. Post-traumatic growth is when you take your lived experience and your trauma and you do good with it and you move forward. And my post-traumatic growth has been providing trainings, normalizing the conversation, and then helping other loss survivors normalize their grief process and what they need to go through.
Thank you, Terri, for letting us share that.
Thank you, Jen. And now is my turn to just share a little bit about my experience of recording this video and what it meant to me. First of all, I had the pleasure of hosting Jen and Christy, her videographer, in my home because when the recording time came, it was foliage in Vermont, and that's a huge tourist time of the year, so you cannot find a hotel room. So they actually got to stay in my home, and we recorded this over a 2-day period. The first day with my fluffs that you all got to meet, and they're a big part of my well-being. And I'm so glad that they were included. And the next day we sat down and had the conversation, and I decided to share my story openly with the community because I am a mental health professional. And through my paid employment, I lead our Zero Suicide team. I do prevention and educational offerings around mental health crisis. And for me, this felt like the next best step in my healing journey. I had not shared the story about my own attempt for 30 years after I attempted. And as you heard in the video, my nephew's death really made me braver in sharing my own story. And it was part of my own growth and healing journey as an attempt survivor. When we recorded this, there was tons of content. I mean, they did hours of, interviews and questions. And when Jen sent the video to me, I was a little surprised that it was more focused on my own attempt and not so much on the loss of my nephew, because I am more apt to talk about the loss of my nephew. It will be again 10 years in January since I lost him. And then I just I felt a sense of relief that this is out there and people can see why this work is so important to me, both in my professional work and my volunteer work. And also just know that even though I'm considered a mental health professional, I'm also a peer support. I come to this with lived experience. Your story, your attempt, your loss is different than mine, but I can relate and connect to you with those. There were some challenges for me with my own mental health and after you share your story, it is out there for the world to see. And for me, it's like that imposter syndrome of like, oh, did I share too much, not enough? Are people going to judge me? There's still that stigma attached to sharing your story. And once it's out there publicly, you can't take it back. And I think that Jen shared earlier, having a good self-care plan for after it's out there is really, really important. And really leaning on your supports and resources that you've developed. Also making sure that as you're sharing your story, enough time has passed that you're in a growth period of either your attempt or your loss, of you're comfortable doing this and you're able to hear what other people need to say and have them share their stories back to you. Because once you share your story with someone else, you become a resource for them. And they oftentimes will share their story back, maybe for the first time ever, and you're making them braver in what they do. I also always ask my sister's permission to share information about my nephew, Isaiah. I think that's important. He is my nephew. She can't take that away from me. She birthed him. I'm her sister, but it's her son and it directly impacts her family. So I think it's really important to make sure if you're sharing a story about a friend or a family member that you're talking to the people close around them and saying, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. How do you feel about that? And what information do you not want me to share? So interestingly enough, this was less about Isaiah and more about my attempt, but I did get to share Isaiah's story, which I've elevated for many, many years. And I honestly think that elevating the voices of people with lived experience, even if they're considered mental health professionals, is powerful. So oftentimes I'm in meetings or trainings and people are like, why is this lady talking about suicide all the time? Why is she talking about mental health crisis all the time? And they don't know my background. And then when I share that I'm an attempt and a loss survivor, and I'm also somebody that lives with acute anxiety and I have to manage that every day, people can really relate to you as a peer rather than a professional. And I also firmly believe peers should be built into professional mental health supports and services as well. And when I shared the story with the video, when it came out with my sister, we watched it over Zoom together. And then my niece, who's now 21, she was 12 when her brother died by suicide. My niece was actually at my house and we sat on the couch and watched it together. And my niece cried and she says, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you that you can share this for other people so they don't feel so alone. And I'm so glad that I have an auntie today. So those are some like powerful takeaways, but I did have to go to through the process of like, am I enough? Is this important? What are people going to think of me? There's still all today, all of that stigma associated with sharing your story. And also, too, we're going to talk about safe use of language, in which I'm very, very passionate about, like the contagion effect. And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't glamorizing what I went through in hopes of helping other people. So I'll stop there, Jen, and kick it back over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Terry. So yeah, I mean, Terry was just talking about some of these things here. You just with campaigns, you want to be really intentional about what you're trying to accomplish. So having the storytellers emphasize the journey and, not just like the incredible pain that they've been through. We want to provide resources and some psychoeducation for people throughout the pieces whenever we can. I think you saw some of that in Terry's story. The campaign itself on the website has all kinds of resources on there. So there's lots of opportunities with these campaigns. And as Terry mentioned, ensuring that you're not romanticizing suicide or oversimplifying it. Suicide is never just for a single reason. And to be aware of the myths around suicide so that you're not perpetuating them inadvertently. So we can also talk a little bit about safe messaging and best practice language. I have a few examples here. This is really important because when we're not using best practice language, we can be contributing to stigma, which is really not, that's not what we want to be doing with these campaigns. Like, I think that's a huge part of the reason we are engaging in these campaigns is to smash the stigma. So it really helps to use best practice language. So there's some examples here. We want to say that someone took their life or died by suicide and use non-biased language. We don't want to refer to anything with suicide as successful or unsuccessful. I just don't think that that's helpful or appropriate. We want to go with person first language, so a person is diagnosed with rather than, calling someone, for example, a schizophrenic, which is just summing them up by their diagnosis. And that's just really kind of disgusting. So we want to be really careful and intentional with the language that we use. Um, in my circles, we like to say suicidal intensity or suicidal despair rather than like suicidal thoughts or suicidal ideation, because we feel that thoughts doesn't really appropriately describe what is being experienced. And it kind of, again, like kind of oversimplifying. I also, in my circles, we prefer the word activated over triggering. So just some brief examples here. And now we're going to play another video that talks, this is from the Shattering the Myths series, and it talks about language. So it makes some similar points, but just another way to try and get this point across about safe messaging and best practice language. Let's see if my video is here. Okay.
Funding for this program is provided in part by the New York State Education Department.
Sometimes commonly used terms around suicide can feel misplaced, landing sharply on those affected by loss or personal struggle. For them, carefully chosen words can be supportive and powerful.
Language is very important. Some of the language has a negative connotation to it.
No, people commit crimes. They don't commit suicide.
I always try to softly correct people.
People commit suicide. What a judgmental comment is what I would say. And I'm not trying to be snarky. We really want to become person-centered, strength-based. And when we use words like commit, especially for those that have experience of an attempt or experience of a loss of a loved one due to suicide, those can be very judgmental comments. Committed, completed, successful. I don't know anyone that would agree that suiciding is a successful thing. So the words that we use, even casually and inadvertently, can make others feel uncomfortable and bring up some very negative thoughts for them in their own personal experiences. So we really try to look at words like died by suicide. It's the facts. Killing themselves, taking one's life. Those are the words that we look to use when we're talking about suicide. It's a word, let's use the word. We don't have to change it into something else.
Suicide isn't only a personal tragedy, it's a pressing public health issue. The words we choose can inspire hope, support recovery, and encourage people to seek help. But language also carries risks. Careless words can unintentionally deepen despair or increase the risk of attempts and loss. Speaking openly, safely, and responsibly about suicide can be a vital part of the solution, helping to foster a culture where people feel valued, supported, and empowered rather than isolated and hopeless.
It's okay to ask for help if you're not feeling well. It's okay to reach out. There's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't mean you're weak. I think everyone needs to know that it's okay not to be okay. I love that saying, because there's a lot of times when a lot of us are not okay. And it's important to be kind to others.
Mental health is a continuum. We all live on it, right? Some days are better than others. It's when it gets to the end where we're feeling unwell a lot more of the time than not, is when we really need to think about addressing what's going on. So we don't get to the point of suicide being a consideration.
Stigma tied to mental health and seeking help is a powerful force, one that tragically adds to suicide risk. Suicide prevention advocate Maggie Henry knows this firsthand. Her work sheds light on how judgment and silence can hold people back from reaching out. By breaking down these barriers, we can create pathways to support and heal.
I was thinking about what everybody else was worried about around me and what they would think about me rather than taking care of myself.
Unfortunately, he felt that he wasn't able to seek any help. I feel like there's a big stigma upon men and mental health, and he felt he had to be strong for his family and that it would show weakness in him if he needed a shoulder to lean on.
It is really, really shameful as being a member of the Black community to talk about mental health. It's very, very rare that anybody even comes out and says, hey, I need help. I don't think it should be that way. I think that we should all try to change that, and it starts with each person.
Known as safe messaging, best practices exist for discussing suicide, whether online or in person. These guidelines emphasize the importance of avoiding detailed descriptions of methods, romanticizing or glorifying suicide, or presenting it as a viable option. Instead, thoughtful communication can promote understanding, encourage help seeking, and support those in need.
Jen, I wanted to thank you so much for sharing this video. I think the conversation around safe messaging is so important. And one of the things that we had talked about in our kind of conversation as we were preparing for this interview was kind of the balance between this piece of amplifying the voices of people with lived experience, and making sure that they feel empowered to tell their story, the healing experiences. And for many of us, that story can be painful. There can be lots of details, there can be curse words, there can be expressing emotions. And so what is it, how do we balance? And I think Terri and you and Nick did a great job of talking about this. How do we balance making sure that we're not silencing people with lived experience while we're promoting safe messaging? How do we kind of navigate that conversation?
Yeah, are you all okay if I answer this? Great. So what we do know about suicide is suicide's the long-term solution to short-term drivers. When our protective factors are not enough that outweigh our risk factors. So we have so many stressors going on, and the causes of suicide is generally not just one incident. And when we're sharing our stories, there is a lot of emotion that can be attached to that, but we want to make sure that we are not we're not amplifying it or glorifying it because of the contagion factor. We know suicide isn't contagious. You can't make somebody suicidal by asking them if they're having thoughts of suicide. It's not like poison ivy. You can't catch it. However, when we're sharing our stories, people that are struggling with their mental health currently, which right now we know 1 in 5 adults, 1 in 4 youth are currently struggling with thoughts of suicide. If we share graphic details around our stories, their fuzzy picture of their thoughts of suicide can become more clear if we're sharing it in a graphic way or in a way that can cause harm. So it's unintentional harm to others. So when we're sharing information about our losses, we want to make sure that we're not sharing graphic memes or graphic stories. We can share components around like safe storage and information around that of like how you can keep yourself safe or others around you safe in times of crisis. So again, we know that suicide isn't contagious, but we want to make sure that people in our space around us that are maybe watching these videos aren't, we're not glorifying it or amplifying it and making their story that they're having their fuzzy story of like, oh, I've been thinking about this more clear in their mind by sharing graphic means and graphic stories, and making sure when we share our stories that the story is of hope and resource and healing, that there's, you might be having thoughts, you might have lived through this thing, or you might be going through it right now, but there's tons of reasons why you need to still be here in this world, and bring them to the other side instead of pushing them to a clearer vision in their mind if they're struggling. And I welcome anybody to add anything that they would like to that.
I guess I also want to bring up that there are more than 150 studies worldwide that document the need for safe messaging and that it truly can be a matter of life and death. And I think, the reason a lot of us want to share our stories and be parts of campaigns like this is to help others. So if we can really understand the facts around it, I think hopefully that can help people be on board with safe messaging. And, creative license is important, but helping to save lives, I think, is more important. Also, I want to say that there's a time and a place, I think, to share graphic details if someone feels the need to. I think the time and place for that would be, with a therapist or as a ritual for yourself. Like maybe you write it all down and then you burn it, or you rip it all up and you send it down a body of water to carry it away from you, or you just rip it up and go put it in the trash and take out the trash and let yourself kind of release that. And then, of course, there's all kinds of therapies. EMDR is a very effective therapy for trauma. So I do think there's a time and a place, and that we should be thoughtful about others, and just, the harm that we can do unintentionally, if we refrain from using safe messaging. So any other comments or questions on that?
I think I would just add, I think it underscores if you're starting or helping coordinate a project to collect stories, that going into it, as you work with storytellers, you're really clear from the outset that sort of this is going to be a process. There may be lots of back and forth, and that it's not just, you record the story and then that's the end of it. And so I think that was really helpful. I think for some of our stories that we collected, there was a lot of back and forth where Jen and other folks who were collecting the stories, talked with the person who was sharing it, and crafted and made some decisions around what would be included or not included. And then always making sure whatever the final product was going to be, that it was okay with the storyteller and that they were comfortable with that version being shared. Because the last thing you want to do is modify something and release it and then have the person say, that's actually not representative of what my experience was like. And so all of that back and forth negotiation and communication is incredibly important from start to finish.
Thank you so much, Nick. Absolutely. All right, I'm going to go back to sharing quickly here if I can. There we go. Okay. And this is you, Nick.
Yeah, so I just wanted to share some general suggestions in terms of what to be thinking about if you wanted to get started on creating a campaign or a storytelling project. There's a lot here, so I'm not going to go into all of the detail, but one of the things that is really important as you're getting started is to think about what is your vision for this project, and what are the specific goals? What are you trying to change? And as I talked about with our Facing Suicide VT project, we had some really clear goals of what we wanted to do with the campaign and change it. And so going into it, thinking about what you want to change and then also what you want to achieve. Generally these projects are great for raising awareness, but then there's other ways that they can be used. For example, having those stories shared with legislators or policymakers or funders, they can be a great message and a great method for advocating change. If you're trying to get it out to the public, it's a great way to do things like reduce stigma, dispel myths, increase help seeking and increase help giving. And as I talked about before, it can be a really wonderful way to bring more people to the table, to work with you, engage with your projects, to continue to expand and share the storytelling. I would say it's really important to not do this alone. Pull together a strong team. You want to have both some core folks who are going to work with you from start to finish. It's also really important to have some folks who can serve in an advisory capacity. For our Facing Suicide VT project, we both had a planning team, and then we had a larger advisory group. As we were developing content, we shared that with them. They gave us feedback. So I highly recommend sort of having both levels of involvement. And then also thinking both about what resources you have, and then other organizations and groups that might be able to contribute resources to the project are really important. And in terms of the type of people you want to involve, absolutely you need to have people with lived experience, both suicide loss survivors, and then people have experienced suicidal despair or may have survived an attempt. Also be thinking about what are the other partners and programs, even funders who might be in your community who are doing similar work or might want to join in what you're doing. We worked really closely with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, their Vermont chapter, and then also the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and lots of other groups. And that can really enrich and support the work that you're doing. Also be thinking about, are there particular leaders, either in your community or regionally or at the state level. We were lucky to be able to recruit the deputy commissioner from the Department of Mental Health. They started the project with us and went a long way to help promoting it and expanding it. And then, as you've heard tonight, there's a lot of expertise and knowledge around how to do this well. And so highly encourage that you find folks who have some experience or background in how to collect and share stories around suicide. And then it also can be really helpful to pull in folks who are experts around communication, who understand how to take stories and content and push them out to the public in different ways. And sort of once you have your team and once you've developed your clear vision and goals, it then becomes time to think about what is your plan, what do you specifically want to develop. There's lots of different options. You've heard about them tonight in terms of what we did for our projects. But there's, sorry, Jen, can you go back to the previous slide? There's things like thinking about, do you want to have an ongoing campaign that occurs over weeks and months, or should it be a one-time event? You also want to think about branding. And when I say branding, I mean both what are the key messages that you want to have shared throughout the campaign, and then also what's the look and feel of the campaign. We actually worked with a media company to help us with some of that. It's also great to think about, do you want to create a website? Maybe there's an existing website where you can share the stories or promote the content. As my son tells me, if you want to reach youth, very few of them actually use websites. And so thinking about how to use social media content like TikTok or Instagram or Facebook to promote or share the stories, that's really important. Thinking about, do you want to collect videos? And then if you do, what kind of videos? With our campaign, we developed some really well-produced videos, but there's plenty of examples out there where people do very simple but very powerful messaging through taking, short videos on their cell phone or other ways. And so there's lots of different ways that you can use video. And then, as I mentioned before, we also developed audio and written content. And then, if it's an option for you, I highly encourage also considering doing a live event. As Jen talked about, those can be really powerful. It's a completely different experience, I would say, than developing pre-produced videos or content for a website. So just go into that understanding that it does take a lot of work to pull those together. Having people tell their story live in itself is a very different experience than being taped. So, okay, now next slide, Jen.
I'm trying. It's a little stuck.
It's a little clunky, yeah, no problem. And then I think the next two categories were just looking at the question of best practices for recruiting storytellers, and then what's the best process for helping people tell their story. And I think you were going to talk about those two parts, Jen.
Yes, I am. My slides are not cooperating. So yes, I was gonna just again talk a little bit about preparing, where I, did some pre-interviews with people to really just check and make sure that they had really thought it through. Because once it's out there, you can't get it back. So just making sure that people were prepared, that they had support. I actually ended up, so I did have a professional videographer with me, but I also used some camera equipment and also some editing equipment from Amherst Media, which is owned by my town here in Amherst, Massachusetts, and it was incredible to have access to this state-of-the-art equipment. They had stuff that even my videographer Christy Lance did not have. And so, if you're interested in doing something like this, just know that there also may be resources out there to help you with some of the hands-on tools and technology. And they were very nice at Amherst Media and helped even answer little technical questions and things that I got into. So, collecting the stories, I did, I think the WSKG shoot was really just one day. I lined up a bunch of people who I had known, some of them from, I had lived and worked there for a while. So I knew some of them, and I also used social media to kind of get friends of friends. And with the Vermont campaign, we had a lot of partners, so that helped us really to find people with lived experience. And we also did some promoting. We had some social media posts about sharing your story and that we were looking for people to share their stories. I think that also went out in some e-blasts. So there were different ways that we got the word out and tried to recruit people to participate. We used our connections quite a bit. So then we also, reviewed the stories both as a team, and I think we mentioned earlier that we really gave our storytellers the final say, like, is this okay with you? Does this represent you well? That sort of thing. Um, so again, not everyone has the opportunity to be part of a campaign. Here are some different ways to use your story to make a difference. There's all kinds of different ways that people can get their stories out there in this digital world. So here are many, many examples of that. Let's go next slide. So we also wanted to share some resources that relate specifically to storytelling. The suicidepreventionmessaging.org, AFSP collects stories and posts stories on their blogs and on their social media. They also, of course, provide education about safe messaging and all of that. Living Proof Advocacy is an organization that one of our storytellers works with. She is a trainer for them. And they apparently have an evaluation toolkit that you can get through their website. And that really dives deep into how do you measure the impact of your storytelling campaign. And that wasn't something that we, with this campaign, were able to do, I think, beyond looking at views and collecting anecdotes from people, but there are ways to be very strategic about that, if that is fits into your budget and your goals. Then, of course, NAMI has a storytelling program called In Our Own Voice. One of our storytellers, Jody, is a trainer for that program, and they do great work. Also, reporting on suicide is a great resource for reporters. It's something I always share whenever I'm interacting with media about stories involving suicide. And I encourage people, when you see coverage that is not using best practice, to call them out on it. I contact them and just say, hey, I want to share this resource for you, and I hope you'll correct your story because it has these problems. But thank you for covering this issue, because we need to have good, safe coverage of this public health issue. This Is My Brave is another organization that highlights lived experience stories. And then, of course, United Suicide Survivors International. And I believe Ryan is going to talk a little bit more about some of the storytelling programs just to wrap up here at the end. And if we advance one more, Terri, I don't know if you can. Terri, Nick, and I were going to make some brief calls to action as our final thoughts here. So I'll invite Terri and Nick to jump in while I think about mine.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I would say, we were lucky because we had a decent amount of resources from a federal grant to do this project, but I would say you can do this regardless of the funding that you have, and there's so many different ways to get stories out there. We hope that if you are in a situation where you'd like to do something like this but don't have a lot of resources, just start connecting with other programs. There's a lot of people out there who are doing this work and would love to support you. And there's some very simple and inexpensive ways to get content out there. So to my message to all of you is, this is doable regardless of where you are and your level of knowledge.
And my call to action would be, not everybody is in a place where they're ready, or may never be in a place where they're ready to share their stories. Share them with the people close to you first and be comfortable with that. And if you're not willing to publicly share your story, share the resources for others that are, and find your jam, find your niche of like what you feel comfortable with. Before I shared my story on the Facing Suicide website, I had testified for our House and Senate Appropriations Committee. So I got to share it in a room full of strangers, which made me more comfortable sharing it out loud. Or, I shared it at a local community event in Hardwick, Vermont, which is like in the middle of nowhere. I know you all aren't from Vermont, so you don't know. And, little ways of like becoming braver, but it's okay not to want to share your stories. There's so many other ways that you can impact um, suicide awareness and prevention as a loss or an attempt survivor or a person with lived experience that is just as impactful as sharing your story.
Awesome, Terry. Thank you. And I'll kind of piggyback on that. United Survivors has a course that is about getting ready to share your story. And some people go through that course and they realize that they're not ready to publicly share it, and that's okay. And just going through the process um, resulted in healing for people, even if they decided not to publicly share. And that's always respected and is, at the discretion of the person, of course. So when I began sharing my story many, many years ago, I had no idea that there was training available, like, courses on that teach you the science and strategy behind storytelling. So some really, really great, unique resources that I encourage you to check out. And I'll pass it over to you, Ryan.
Amazing. Well, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you so very much to each of you for being here tonight, but equally as important for all the amazing leadership and work you did on this campaign. I think that it's incredibly powerful. I will just share, as Jen mentioned, we do have our online storytelling courses, which are available at unitesurvivors.org. You can also learn about our in-person storytelling workshop and retreat, the Eye of the Survivor, which you can get involved with. And so all of these resources are available on our website, again at unitesurvivors.org. I do. Oh, wonderful. We have Tina with us who attended the Eye of the Survivor workshop and retreat as well. So one of the things before we close out tonight, I have one more question for everybody, but I also want to make sure that there are, if anybody else has any questions, that we give space for that. So, does anybody else in our chat or the webinar have any questions that they would like to ask tonight? Yes, agree. Big heart and thank you, everyone. So as we're adding some resources and links to the chat for those who are with us, and we can add those on our website as well. One of the things that I just wanted to do is just quickly recap some of the amazing things that we heard here tonight. And again, I just want to thank you so much that the reason for doing these campaigns is, helps to develop leaders. It builds community among survivors. The critical importance of having a campaign allows for the diversity of voices where people can relate to speakers in different ways. We also heard about the critical importance of safe messaging and that part where we want to share our stories to do good, and therefore we want to avoid causing harm. And I just think that information that you all provided here tonight was so important. The strategy, I think, for being able to do this in other communities is really, really powerful. We are dedicated to building a movement and creating change. And I think that what you all have done and what you all have shared allows every other community to start taking this as an example that they can share and create change. Across the globe. I really like what you told us about we need to set a vision, we need to build our team, we need to have our action plan and share details, we need to do our recruitment, and then we need to help coach speakers so that they feel comfortable in what they're doing. One of the other things that you shared here that I think was really powerful tonight was that people can share in the way that works best for them. So whether that's through a video, a written story, audio, or even through art, which I think is really powerful. I want to thank you all so much. I feel like you have created a seed today that I know will grow, and I am very much looking forward to seeing that happen. Um, the last question that I have for you tonight is a little bit of how have you seen your story create change? And as part of your storytelling or as part of this campaign, I know when we were together, we talked a little bit about this, but I'm wondering if you would mind sharing what you've seen happen as a result of what you've done here.
I guess I can start. So in sharing my story, I mentioned, that I have done some advocacy work. And here in Massachusetts, a couple of years ago, we had been advocating for some bridge barriers at one particular bridge for people advocated for really like more than a decade. And I was part of those efforts. I contacted my local newspaper a lot and talked about it, shared my story and why it was important and why I wanted to see these bridge barriers get built. We had a local mom who lost her son and ended up holding rallies at this bridge. And I think that is what really turned the tide and helped the state decide that it was time to put the barriers in place. And so we have those barriers now, and there have not been any suicide deaths since they installed the barriers. So that's just one example.
And I don't want to
Yeah,
put anyone on the spot at all. So, Nick, do you have a story to share?
yeah, I mean, I think I touched on this a little bit, but there's been some really wonderful things that we've been noticing that have been happening since we began this campaign. One is that we just have been connected with so many amazing people like Terri and Jen and all of our storytellers, and they just keep showing up, keep volunteering, keep asking about being involved. And so creating a platform and a place for people to gravitate towards and to share their stories for me has been very powerful and very generative. And, we started with, I think, originally 6 people volunteered, and we weren't sure if we were going to be able to get more people to volunteer. And as, Jen said, we now have over 30 stories, and we continue to get folks asking to share their stories. And people who view this as a safe place to share their story for the first time in a really meaningful way. And I think you heard about that tonight. So all of that's been wonderful. And then I am a bureaucrat, so I have to throw out one little stat, which we're really excited about. So Facing Suicide VT, the first several years, at the most, we generally had about 8,000 users per year coming to the site. Over this past year, after creating this latest wave, our numbers for this past year jumped up to 24,000 users in a year. And so we feel like this work is creating a place where people know about and go to for stories, for hope, for resources, understanding how to help each other. And so it's helping build a movement and a place where Vermonters can go to learn about and to talk about suicide.
Well, I appreciate you all so much. And Terri, I just want to, if you have anything to add, I certainly want to make space for that. But if not, then I will read your facial expressions to tell me whether or not.
Thank you. My internet cut out. Shocker. I'm glad it happened at the very end of this. And, I always think about in my work as a survivor, both of an attempt and a loss, and my professional work of the micro and macro level. And I'm really passionate about youth mental health, especially as a teenage attempt survivor and losing my nephew as a teenager. And for me, on a little bit more of a micro level, this video has been shared with a lot of the youth in our communities, and I had already been working with them for a very long time. And then they came up to me and said, "We had no idea you went through this when you were 15." And the hugs and the shared compassion together of like, all right, I'm an adult, I'm somewhat healed. I don't think we ever fully heal for life experience, but the youth that I work with, it's really had a deep impact on them of understanding why I show up for them every day. And it's not just because I think they're cool humans, but they are cool humans, and how that connection has been solidified and made stronger in the communities that I work in on a professional level. So I'm sorry my internet cut out.
It worked out perfectly. It seemed to be great. And I want to just thank you for sharing that piece as well. Um, I want to honor each of you tonight for being here, for putting together this training, for sharing with us your expertise and skills. I want to thank everybody in our audience for being here tonight. We have about 30 more seconds if anybody has any final words to share. If so, okay. Well, everyone, again, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us tonight. You can learn more about this particular campaign at facingsuicidevt.com. You can learn more about our resources at United Suicide Survivors International at unitesurvivors.org. And I hope everyone has an amazing evening. Thank you so much. And I do just want to share with you, Nick and Terry and Jen, once we close out the webinar, it will end abruptly. And so, what I want to say to you is just thank you so very much. I hope you have an amazing evening, and I look forward to following up soon so we can help share your message and show you what the webinar looks like. So, I hope everybody has a good night.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Good night, everybody.